firm as they go.
What's up, guys? Sean at Shock Surplus here. Today we're going to go over some basics. One of the things that we get a lot of is customers that don't know how high their vehicle is sitting over factory, whether it's factory height. Sometimes they have a lift kit on their truck, and they don't really, you might not know exactly what the previous owner put on it. Is it a coil spring, a lifted coil spring? Is it a coil spring spacer? Is it blocks? All these little things that if you're not too aware of vehicle suspensions and you're buying a vehicle secondhand, then when you go to replace certain parts, such as the shocks, you are kind of left in the dark. And so we're just going to go over how to measure your shocks, and we're going to go over how to measure what it looks like at ride height, how that kind of translates into finding the appropriate shock for your vehicle when you're kind of shopping for shocks. And then we will take off the shocks off the vehicle, get full extended and collapsed lengths accurately, and then we'll compare those against a few aftermarket options that we have here to show kind of how to choose the best shock for your given setup. So we've got a Ram heavy duty right here. One thing to keep in mind as well when you're thinking about measuring your shocks and considering extended lengths, collapse lengths, and travel lengths is that trucks like the Ram Heavy Duty, the Ford Super Duty, other heavy duty 3/4 ton, 1 ton trucks, they are either coil sprung in the front or leaf sprung in the front. Lighter duty trucks like the Tacoma, the 4Runner, the F-150s, Nissan Titans, the Tundras, they are coilover sprung in the front. So you can't really compare shock travel and shock measurements between the applications and assume that just because this is a 24-inch extended length shock with 11 inches of travel, then that's somehow way better than a Tundra's 11 inches extended length with 8 inches of travel. It's a lot different between the different setups. On a coil sprung solid axle front suspension, you see usually a 1-to-1 ratio of movement at the wheel to movement at the axle, whereas on an independent front suspension system such as the Tacoma, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So when considering shock lengths and shock measurements and all that kind of stuff, make sure you're comparing apples to apples in that regard. But hopefully we give you everything you need to know right now in order to make the best decision. So on this, we're just going to measure, if you don't have access to a jack, you don't have access to any tools to remove your wheels and remove the shocks, that's okay. We're going to, here you basically just measure at ride height from where the shock enters the frame, right up here, to the center of the lower mounting bolts. So we're in here, center of the lower mounting bolt in there. Up here, approximately about 20 3/4 inches on that shock travel length. So what that tells me is there's probably another additional 4 to 5 inches possibly on up travel and on down travel, giving this shock a total of roughly 10 or 11 inches of total travel. So if I was shopping for shocks, I'd call up someone and be like, the front ride height right now, those front shocks on this Ram HD are at about 20 to 21 inches at ride height. So from there, we've got a catalog of a bunch of parts, a bunch of measurements, and we can pinpoint approximately what kind of shock you need, what lengths you need, and whether or not there is a lift on the vehicle or not. Because we have factory lengths, and then we have lengths for a 2-inch leveling kit, a 4-inch lift kit, a 6-inch lift kit, long travel kits. So we've got all that information down there to kind of deduce where your truck is sitting, whether it has aftermarket accessories or suspension modifications. So now that we've measured the front at ride height, measuring the rear is exact same situation. On this truck, it has a stem top mount, and a eyelet bottom mount, just like the front. And so you'll do the same process in the back. Whether it's sometimes a lot of rear shocks are eyelet to eyelet, so that's even easier because then you just measure from the center of the lower mounting bolt to the center of the top mounting bolt, and there's your ride height. So that's a pretty simple process. Now we're going to get into removing the shocks, and we'll compare against some aftermarket options to kind of show you exactly how we choose the best shock for your replacements. So the wheels and tires are off, and the suspension is fully drooped out right now. It's at near max droop. We've got the jack stand underneath the center of the frame, and then, sorry, the jack under the center of the frame, and then jack stands on the side frame rails. This is allowing the entire front axle to droop completely out. So this should give us a pretty good, accurate measurement of the total extended length of this front shock. So we'll do similar to what we did at ride height, which is measure from the top where the shock enters the frame to the center of the lower mounting bolt. And we've got approximately 24 and 5/8 inches on an extended length. So now that we have ride height measurement, we've got total extended length measurement, and we're going to take the shock off now to get a accurate extended length measurement. We don't anticipate it extending much further than what it is right now, but just in case it does, we'll have that information. And once again, this isn't entirely necessary when you're trying to look for shocks by yourself, but if you do have the tools to remove the wheels and tires, you do have the tools to completely jack it up and droop out your suspension, this gives the most accurate way to kind of deduce what kind of shocks you need. So next up, we'll remove these front and rear shocks and compare that against some of the options we have here in the shop. So luckily, this is one of the easiest shocks to really remove and install the new ones. It's just literally 2 bolts. So this one down here, you're gonna need, what size is this? 13/16 inches. Is that how you read that? All right, well, it wasn't as easy as possible, or as we thought. This bolt up here is pretty hard to access with the fender liner on, so we are going to take off the fender liners on both sides. These are 5/16 heads on all these bolts. That doesn't want it. That doesn't want to come in. Fender liner off makes it way easier, obviously. Good, good, good. All right. So now we had to remove the fender liners because it was interfering with basically the kinds of tools that you can use to access the top nut on that front shock. So now that we were able to remove the fender liner, took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, 7 or 8 bolts, had to remove it. And then now you can access that top nut on that shock way easier with the power tool. So we did that. The shock is out. Now we're going to show you some of the shock length differences and other options that we could use to replace the stock Bilsteins. All right. So we have the stock front Bilstein out of the truck, and I think on the truck we had the extended ride height or extended length at approximately 25 inches. to see how that translates to it actually off the vehicle. Yeah, this extended length comes out at about, let's see, with this on there. So this extended length comes out to about 24 inches. So I guess we were measuring past the bushings while it was on the vehicle. So 24 inches approximately on the extended length on the stock Power Wagon shocks. And that'll go for 2014 all the way up to the current 2020 platforms. We're comparing it against two other Rancho RS9000 shock options right here. We kind of took our best guess as far as what lengths are going to be appropriate for the replacement. So we have a 999043 and then a 999044. Just from the top-down view here, it looks like the 4.4 is going to be our best bet. The 4.3 is a tad on the short side, which I wouldn't mind something a little bit longer. As we were taking the shocks out of the vehicle, it definitely felt like the shocks were part limiting strap on that front suspension, because as soon as we removed that lower bolt, the front axle drooped down just a tad bit more. So we know that the factory shocks are precisely the length of the suspension travel. So we wouldn't mind something a little bit longer in case we want a little bit more droop out of that front suspension without compromising the shocks and the shock mount. So we're going to go with the 9044. Rancho has these at 24.6 inches extended length by 15.9 collapse length. So just as far as how you measure the shocks to get those exact measurements. So you're looking at center of this lower bolt up to right where this nut ends, right where this nut kind of is at on the top mount. This is where the bushings is going to sit on it. And so 24, our measurements look closer to 24.75, but that's minute details just to show a little bit closer. Measuring from the center of this eyelet down here to where this nut is at on the top stud. This nut is actually welded onto this stud. You can't remove this. This serves as a leverage point to install the shock. So from here to here, 24.6. We could probably compress this all the way down here. And so from the center of this mounting to right here is going to be 15.9. This is max compression right here. Can I get it to stay? No longer. So gas shocks, they'll expand on their own. So yeah, we're gonna get into the install now, and front should be no problem. The rear on this doesn't look like it's gonna be a walk in the park though, so we'll see. All right, guys, since it's a much more pain in the butt than we were expecting, I brought in Jeff to really get it done much quicker than I was going to. So we're putting in RS9000s in the front. We're mounting up the lower bolts first, and then we'll attack the top part. All the hardware always comes with all of the Rancho shocks. So you got two rubber bushings, you got two flat washers, and you got your top nut. So always double check before you get the install going to make sure you have all your hardware, because we hate getting the phone calls that there's missing hardware in the middle of an install. Obviously, that's not our intention ever, but sometimes it happens. And with that, all done. So that's much easier to get the install done when you remove the inner liner. That's almost a necessity at this point. So now we are going to move on to the back, which is going to require the fender liner to be removed as well, and figure out the puzzle of accessing the top bolt on those rear shocks. All right, guys, the front end's done, back on the ground. Wasn't as easy as we thought, mainly because this fender liner really gets in the way of the access to the top of that front shock. So that may be the case on pretty much 2014 and up Ram 2500s and 3500s. Not too familiar with the 13 and sooner, but just keep that in mind. Even though it looks accessible, don't forget you need some tools to get in there as well. You can't do it by hand. So front end is done. We get the Rancho RS9000s on there right now. So if you didn't catch it before, we took off the shocks. We did some measurements while I was on the vehicle, while it was fully drooped out, and then also while the shocks were off the vehicle, and compared the stock Bilsteins against some Rancho aftermarket ones. So now that the front's done, we're gonna get to the rear and see what troubles we may run into there. All right, guys, we are removing the rear wheels and tires. Now to remove the fender liners. Luckily on the back, they're all the same size. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right, the fender liner's off. And now the magic happens where we have to figure out access to this rear bolt. Sorry, the rear nut on the top of the shock. This is gonna be the trouble part. All right, 18mm socket. That will access this top nut, and then just slow and steady. We got the rear shocks out. This is the Bilstein factory rear shock. It's about 25 inches extended length. Here is the Rancho RS9000 rear replacement. Mounts, identical. Body size. The body size on the Bilstein is slightly longer. Body size to body size here. This monotube is a little bit longer, so the total stroke of the actual shock is going to be longer on the monotube. This is shortened up. Not too sure why this is shorter. The RS9000 is a triple tubed shock. So they basically have their normal twin tube technology plus a third tube to help with the compression adjustment happening here. The extended length of these is probably about 1 inch to 1.5 inches longer on the RS9000s. So typically that might be a little bit too long for exact OE replacement. We're going to run them anyways. We do a lot of driving, a lot of rock crawling with these, so we do expect a little bit of excess droop in the rear, front and the rear. So we will report back, see how that turns out. We're gonna get these in right now though. All right, we got the top nut off. We're gonna get the lower bolt done as well. Shock almost out. Oh, yeah. Not as easy as it looks for a quote-unquote 2-bolt install. So we got rear shocks out now. Now we'll get the RS9000s installed. First, got to find the boot. So on these Rancho bushings, you want to put the wide part on the outside. So outside meaning wide part on the top, on the top bushing, and then the wide part below on the bottom bushing. Make sure you put the washer on, and then the bushing on, and then put it in. For the top part of these shocks, you're going to want to hold the top stud in place with a wrench while you tighten the nut with a different socket. And bolt on the lower. Top nuts tightened, lower bolts tightened, we are done. I'm going to set these at the softest setting and just go from there. We'll report some feedback on the RS9000s later in another video. Thanks so much.